Hello there, thrill seekers. Good morning. Before we get started, I want to show you a picture somebody sent me of me aged 2 years younger than I am now. What do you think? Actually, that's my face superimposed upon the beard and hair of Swami Satchidananda when Swami Satchidananda was 2 years younger than me. So this is what I would look like 2 years ago. If you go back and watch my videos from 2 years ago, this is what I look like. Okay, so today I'd like to talk about an email that I got, and it was somebody inquiring about a line that she found in this book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. This is the newer cover. I borrowed this from the Angel City Zen Center. I ordered another copy for myself because I realized I ought to have a copy of this. This was the first book about Zen that I ever read back in, a billion years ago. Same cover, same back cover picture as it had, except I don't think the UPC mark was on the version that I had back then. But anyway, this is the book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, and the quotes that she sent me are, I'm reading them right off the email. The purpose of Buddhist teaching is to point to life itself existing beyond consciousness in our pure original mind. And our true nature is beyond our conscious experience. It is there, beyond consciousness, that we have to establish the foundation of our practice. And these lines, it took me a while to kind of figure out where they are, but they appear in a chapter called Beyond Consciousness that appears near the end of the book. Now, I don't know exactly how these chapters were, how they chose to organize these. Shunryu Suzuki gave talks, and he had said that he wanted to write a book. And so what happened is a few of his students, I'm not sure exactly who to give credit for, Trudy Dixon is the editor, listed on here. Richard Baker also was involved. But a few of his students taped his talks with a little cassette recorder, and they organized them into a book. And I don't think they're necessarily in the order that Suzuki Roshi gave them. But the sections they put them into are right practice, right attitude, and right understanding. And this one appears in the right understanding. It's actually the second to last chapter in the right understanding. So in the eyes of the people who put this book together, this would probably be what they would consider one of the more difficult chapters. It's not necessarily true that Suzuki Roshi thought of it as one of the more difficult chapters. He probably just gave lectures as he felt them, which is kind of what I do. I just kind of try to figure out what the audience is receptive to and speak to that, which is why it's kind of difficult sometimes to figure out what people want to hear. But let's read those lines in context. She sort of edited the lines. So here's what he actually says. In the first paragraph, I'll just read the whole first paragraph because it contains one of the lines she asks about. We should establish our practice where there is no practice or enlightenment. As long as we practice Zazen in the area where there is practice and enlightenment, there is no chance to make perfect peace for ourselves. And this idea of practice and enlightenment is an old thing in Zen, that practice and enlightenment are the same thing. This is Dogen's big innovation. He credits his teacher Tendo Nyojo with teaching it to him, and that Tendo Nyojo was part of a line of people who looked at it this way. That's what Dogen says. He doesn't claim to have invented it. But the old idea was that you practiced in order to get enlightenment. So you practice, 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 and then enlightenment is the result. And Dogen said, no, there's no practice and enlightenment. There is just enlightenment that happens as a part of practice. The practice itself is enlightenment. And there's an old saying about this, and I just spent some time on the Google trying to find it, and I couldn't find it. So maybe one of these days I'll find it, but it's an old phrase. I'm trying to remember exactly who said it and exactly the words, but I'm going to have to do it from memory. It's something like, I don't say that there is no practice and enlightenment, only that the state is not defiled. So, now I can't remember who said it, but anyway, I swear to God, this is a real Zen statement. And it's not that you can't divide things into practice and enlightenment in a sort of a conceptual way and say, okay, this is practice and this is enlightenment. You can sort of do that, but the real fact is that the enlightenment is always there, and the practice how is practice related to enlightenment? You are practicing within your own delusion. Let's look at what Suzuki Roshi says, because he says it better than I can. Right at the beginning of the chapter, they have a little excerpt. They do this with every chapter. And he says, Suzuki Roshi says, "To realize pure mind in your delusion is practice. If you try to expel the delusion, it will only persist the more. Just say, oh, this is just delusion, and do not be bothered with it." And he says that delusions kind of run away ashamed, is how he puts it, when you recognize them as delusions. So the recognition of delusion as delusion is a kind of enlightenment, whether it feels like enlightenment or not. He says, "To realize pure mind in delusion is your practice. If you have pure mind, essential mind, in your delusion, the delusion will vanish. It cannot stay when you say this is delusion. It will be very much ashamed. It will run away." So that's the exact words that he used. So whether or not you attain enlightenment, just to sit zazen is enough. When you try to attain enlightenment, then you have a big burden on your mind. Your mind will not be clear enough to see things as they are. If you truly see things as they are, then you will see things as they should be. On the one hand, we should attain enlightenment. That is how things should be. But on the other hand, as long as we are physical beings, in reality, it is pretty hard to attain enlightenment. That is how things actually are in this moment. But if we start to sit, both sides of our nature will be brought up, and we will see things both as they are and as they should be. So that's a really good line, too. So now let's look at the other line that my questioner asked me about. Here it is. "The purpose of Buddhist teaching is to point to life itself existing beyond consciousness in our pure original mind. All Buddhist practices were built up to protect this true teaching, not to propagate Buddhism in some wonderful mystical way. So when we discuss religion, it should be in the most common and universal way. We should not try to propagate our way by wonderful philosophical thought." And he kind of goes on about that and about Buddhist philosophy and studying Buddhist philosophy. This is something my teacher, Nishijima Roshi, talked to me about when he found out I liked to write. He said, "You should write about Buddhist philosophy and you should study Buddhist philosophy." And he was very interested in that, and he was very impressed by Kodo Sawaki's vast knowledge of Buddhist philosophy, particularly Yogacara philosophy. So I think, this is just my assumption, that maybe what's hanging up the person who asked this question of me is this idea of beyond consciousness. So that gets into some weird ideas. So you kind of think that there can't be anything beyond consciousness. And, well, let's look at it from the point of view of a different tradition. I keep referencing poor old Ramesh Balsekar, but he kind of comes from he does come from the Advaita Vedanta tradition, and the way he talks and the way his teacher Nisargadatta Maharaj talks, they divide things up into consciousness, as they'll say everything is consciousness. But then they'll say beyond consciousness is witnessing, and then beyond witnessing is awareness. And they don't go any further than that, at least that I can remember, but they kind of divide it up into consciousness, then witnessing, then awareness. So you have consciousness, and then you have witnessing, which witnesses consciousness, and then you have awareness, which is aware of witnessing. So that's the way they put it. In Buddhism, in the Yogacara school, they kind of, it's maybe not fair to say that this is exactly the same thing, but they divide it up into threes somewhat similarly, which they call mano vijnana, which is just the normal sort of ego thinking consciousness, manas, which is the personality, which is kind of beyond that consciousness, that kind of looks through the mano-vijnana consciousness, and then alaya vijnana, which is even above that, which is a sort of universal mind. And alaya vijnana I've talked about a few times on this channel, and it is super duper complicated, and nobody ever gets it. So right now Dave at the Angel City Zen Center is apparently preparing a talk on alaya vijnana, and good luck to him, because I don't think anybody's ever figured that stuff out. But it's quite interesting if you want to kind of go look into it. There's a lot of books on that sort of thing, and it's something that we in the Zen stream tend not to talk about. Katagiri Roshi talked about it fairly often. Kodo Sawaki referenced it. Nishijima Roshi never even mentioned it. I don't remember Tim ever even mentioning it, so probably we can say that Koben Chino. I don't think Koben Chino in any of his books references it. So it's kind of not reference, but it's kind of sitting there in the background, in the backdrop of this, is this kind of idea. And most of the people who study Buddhism enough have studied this stuff and kind of, worked out their own version of it in their heads. But this is kind of the point. And the point is, when you get into things like consciousness and what's beyond consciousness and awareness and witness and all this stuff, the problem with that is it tends to try to become a fixed thing. People try to turn it into a fixed thing in their mind, and you can see it when you look at a book like Consciousness Speaks by Ramesh Balsekar, or any of these people who will use those kind of terminology. Is that you can witness they're usually in the form of dialogues and conversations between the teacher and an audience, or maybe just one person. And you can see the people getting hung up on that. They'll be like, well, what is the difference between consciousness and awareness, and consciousness and witnessing, and how can I become more in the witness and not in the awareness, or more in the awareness and not in the witness, and it gets all very convoluted, and people are trying to rank these things in their mind. But the thing is, what usually happens in the Zen school is when people get like that, it's like, this is where the Three Stooges stuff comes in, and they go, whack! Like they get slapped in the face by the teacher and goes, no, get your head out of that stuff. It's just a model for trying to kind of, work things out, and it's a useful model, but even the most useful model is just a model. And it's just a concept, and it doesn't really matter in the end. There's just what is. But some models are better than the others, So the model, for example, that I grew up with, that I was a meat machine, with awareness due to the fact that I am a meat machine, and it just sort of accidentally evolved that way to help me have sex and eat food, and that's all there was to it, and bottom line, that model has been useful for certain things, but it is ultimately wrong. And the Zen model, or the Yogacara model, is also ultimately wrong, and the Advaita Vedanta model is also ultimately wrong. But some models are better than the others, like I say. And so the idea that there is a beyond consciousness, I think, is a useful thing to remember. And when you're actually sitting in practice, establishing your practice in that, you sit there with your deluded mind, and you're using your deluded mind to see through all of that. You establish the practice within that deluded mind. Even Dogen says this. You establish the practice within Chitta Matra, which is the kind of thinking mind. You establish the practice there, and then use that to kind of go beyond it. But you have to realize that thinking itself will never go beyond it. Will never, ever go beyond it. There's no thought form that you can construct that is going to be the correct thought form that's gonna get you there. But you can know that there is something beyond consciousness, and you can call that witness and awareness, or Ilaya Vijnana and Manovijnana and Manas and all these other fancy words, to kind of help you point in that direction. But once you're kind of pointed in that direction, you got to forget about all that. So the best thing to do when you're sitting is just forget about everything. Just whatever's going on, just let each thing go as it comes up, whether it's a deep philosophical thought, whether it's a thought of what you're going to eat tomorrow night, or whatever it is. Just let all of it go, whether it's mundane and ordinary, or whether it's beautiful enlightenment. You got to let all of it go, and that's the point. So I think I've probably just made a mess of things. If you want to help me keep making messes of things, you can send a donation to this URL you're seeing there. That will take you to my Patreon and PayPal links, and that is the best way to support me. That's the only way I'm getting money these days. But if you're having financial trouble, as I always say, don't donate to me. Just forget about donating to me. It's not gonna, get you good karma or anything. But I do thank those of you who do keep donating to me, because you're getting a lot of good karma for donating to me. I'm sure of it. So we will see you next time. Have a good time all the time, and bye. What's going on, Ziggy? You like seeing the people?